serve you who are here tonight, you who are also watching by streaming audience, and everyone else who could not be here. Welcome to your first date night live with your district attorney. It's our date night, which means that we have an opportunity to come together and talk about the issues that are important to you. And I want this to be a good date, so I want y'all to make sure that I wore my pretty pearls and make sure my lipstick isn't messed up, okay? But tonight is an opportunity for us to meet and to chat. But when we establish the date night series, it stands for District Attorney Town Hall Event. And oftentimes what happens when you have elected officials who host a town hall, they'll call you down to the courthouse or to City Hall where they meet and expect you to come to talk about the issues. But it's been really important for us as an administration to get out into the Chatham County communities to hear the issues that are important to our citizens, neighbors, and constituents, to make sure that what we're doing and what we're teaching, what we're talking about, is relevant to your everyday lives and is on point. So this is the first in what we hope will become a series of date nights with your district attorney. So I say that also to say that to those of you who are watching by streaming, or those of you who might watch this recorded session at some later time, we want to hear from you. So if there are issues that concern you, issues that you're seeing in your community, then please reach out to us at our website, which is www.chathamcountyda.com, so that we can incorporate your thoughts and ideas into our future planning. So a few housekeeping matters before we start. I want to start by always making sure that we respect the House and we give credit to where credit is due. So Pastor Osborne, I want to thank you. Y'all give it up for Pastor Osborne tonight. Pastor Andre Osborne, who is not only the pastor of the great, wonderful church, First Tabernacle Missionary Baptist Church, which is also my church, but that's not why it's wonderful. It's wonderful because it has great history here in the city of Savannah, and Pastor Osborne has been very welcoming to us, and he is himself a community activist and has done a lot of outreach through this ministry, and so they reached out to our administration and offered to be the first to host our date night live event. Now, I'm hoping that that will catch fire, Pastor Osborne, right? And that we, as an office, will be visiting and receiving calls from different folks around Chatham County to host us for these events. I want to thank you, attendees, for being here tonight, for braving COVID and everything that comes along with that. I'm so glad to see you here, present and accountable, also masked up. And one of the other wonderful things that Pastor Osborne has done is he redid this sanctuary, and downstairs, if you've gotten a chance to see it, isn't it lovely? I think so. It's lovely. Great job he's done. But one of the additions that he made was he was forward thinking, and he thought about how to change and work with the HVAC system so that it can be cleansing the air as we're in here, so to keep you safe, and taking that extra added step. So Pastor Osborne, I want to thank you for that as well. So I don't want to keep you too long because the scheduled time is from 6 to 8. We want to make sure that we get in and out, give you the information that you need, and also create an opportunity for you to ask us whatever questions you might have. So tonight, our first topic for our Date Night Live series is, where am I pointing this? What is an expungement, and how do I get one? When we took this office in January of 2021, one of the questions we got far and away, when we get a lot of questions about things like officer shootings, excessive force, just any number of things. And that's not a surprise, given what we see going on in our communities and as we start to observe the movement for social justice. But far and away, this request about expungements was probably one of the most oft cited or received requests that we got in our office in the past 7 to 8 months. And that's part of the reason that we're covering it tonight. But one of the other reasons it's important to study it is because there have been some very new and recent changes to the law in the area of expungements and record restrictions is what they're supposed to be called technically. And we want you to know about these changes because they affect you and us, all of us, in our daily lives, right? So fortunately, you will not have to sit here for 2 hours or an hour and a half and listen to my talking head all night, right? And no one is an expert 100% about everything, right? And so tonight, I'll be joined by 2 speakers, and that'll be me. This lovely lady seated at the table here is Nancy DeVetter. For those of you who don't know Ms. DeVetter, she is a veteran attorney in our community, and she has her own practice now, but was formerly working for Georgia Legal Services, where she was one of very few, perhaps the only attorney in that office for quite a while, who was designated to cover this issue of expungements. So she is an expert in the law as far as much as we can get one. But she has also devoted countless hours in service. And we've worked together in expungement clinics over the years, serving the community, answering questions in this very important area. And so she is extremely qualified to touch base and talk about the topic we're here to discuss tonight. And then we may hear from State Representative Carl Gilliard from Georgia, House District 162. Many of you may be familiar with Representative Gilliard, and again, he was, along with State Rep Derek Mallow, who I know is here but don't see him right now. Both of these people, these state reps, have been adamant about this issue of expungement because they understand how important it is to the concept of justice, equality, and a stable economy here in Chatham County. So let's go ahead and get into our topic for tonight. Anytime we get together to talk about a specific topic, it seems to me the first thing we need to be addressing is, why are we even talking about this? Why is it important? Some of us know that it has some importance, right? But we don't know fully why. And so it's important for us to understand, as an initial matter, that criminal history is not just about an individual. It's not just about what happens to an individual. Criminal history really is a community or a societal issue. And here's what I mean by that. 1 out of every 3 Americans has some kind of criminal history. That means an arrest, a conviction, something having to do with the courts. That's 1 out of every 3 Americans. That's a huge number. Why is that number critical and important? It's important because the media will have you believe that criminal history is an issue of us versus them. Our media system will have you believe that maybe criminal history is something that's only experienced by people of a certain race, color, creed, or economic class. But this is untrue. The data shows differently. 1 in 3 Americans has some kind of interaction with law enforcement and the court system. And if that's not staggering enough, consider the fact that 50% of America's children have a parent with criminal history. 50%, half the children in America have at least one parent who has some interaction with the criminal justice system. Well, why is that important? What we'll talk about in just a second is that criminal history, really of any kind, is directly related to one's ability to find employment, access to housing, access to benefits, and access to medical care. That means that half of America's children are impacted by the fact that their parents have some criminal history that could be affecting them. It doesn't just affect the parent, it affects the household. Another thing that's important to remember is that social science shows that there's a direct link between crime and poverty. That's important. And our country incarcerates more citizens than any other country across the globe. The United States of America incarcerates more people than third world countries and every other country in the world combined. Well, what does that mean? If you take a look at this graph in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, what you'll notice on the bottom are 4 squiggly lines that are red, purple, blue. Yeah, just red, purple, and blue. Those numbers indicate crime trends, and they indicate that at a certain point, generally speaking, crime was going up. But then this is national crime. But then around 1999, 2002, 2005, you start to see a downward trend in crime. But look at the green line on this graph. That green line represents the number of incarcerations in our country. So here's the question. If, in fact, for the past 10 to 20 years, national crime has been going down, then why is it true that the level of incarcerations is going up? There must be something else responsible for that. Now, this is a nonpartisan presentation, and I have my own ideas about why those numbers might be going up that I probably won't get into expressly right now. But what we do know is that for all of the money that we're spending as a country on incarceration and supervised release and probation, and for all of the number of inmates that are being incarcerated in our country that's going up and up with each passing year, unfortunately, what we found is our streets and communities are not any safer because of it. What does that mean? Overall, that means that our criminal justice system in its current form is not working. But we all know how the saying goes. Insanity is what? Doing the same thing and expecting different results. Right. Are we insane, America? I'm not. We're not. But what this means is that we have to take a closer look at our system and figure out what we need to do to make it work. And there's a reason why this issue is all the more urgent for everyone in this room and for everyone in Chatham County who's listening to this presentation, and for everyone across the state of Georgia. There's a reason that we're having this conversation tonight, and that reason is, ladies and gentlemen, that for as awful as those numbers sound nationally, they're even worse in the state of Georgia. I love Georgia. I'll admit I'm not from here originally, but this has been my home since 1990. I'm dating myself, 1995. So I've adopted Georgia, and Georgia has adopted me. Unfortunately, though, doesn't change the fact that 4.1 million Georgians have a criminal history. It doesn't change the fact that Georgia is second in our nation for the highest levels of incarceration. And unfortunately, our beloved state of Georgia is number 1 for individuals on probation, parole, and other forms of supervised release. Our state, in fact, our county, has the highest rate of recidivism of any other county in the state of Georgia, or that means that there's the highest level of reoffenses committed than any other county in the state. And unfortunately, here in our beloved state, although people of color, Black and brown people, represent roughly 30% of the population, they often take up or amount to 50 to 60% of the jail population statewide. Why is that? Our state is number 2 in the nation for creating roadblocks or impediments to people who get off of probation and parole and try to re-enter into society. And unfortunately, our state is one of the last states in the nation to relax expungement rules and to pass reform-minded laws that address some of these statistics that I've just set out for you. Why is that? We can't change our practice until we change our mind. And we can't change our mind until we change our perspective about what's happening in our criminal justice system, not just nationally, but right here in our own state and county. Now, I've given you the data. Data is important. And it's important to this presentation because I want you to know that I didn't make this up. Brilliant minds, far more expert and wonderful than my own, have conducted social science and research that proves this data. If you don't believe me, look it up, okay? But the data and the statistics is where the story begins. It's not where it ends. Because although that data is really important, the biggest reason for us to be having this discussion tonight, human rights, justice, equality, those things are important. See, what we believe in our office is that criminal justice and prosecution is a social contract. Make no mistake about it, that if you are found to be guilty of a crime beyond a reasonable doubt and the evidence in that case suggests guilt, that we will pursue it, particularly if the case or the crime involves a person of a vulnerable community, women, children, elderly, sexual assault, homicides, kidnappings. Those are the cases at the very top of the food chain, and that is our highest commitment, to dedicate our greatest human resources to addressing those cases. But also, we must be clear about the fact that if it's true that every person has to pay their debt to society, then once that debt is paid, it is part of our social contract to help that person reintegrate to become a successful contributing member of the society. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is not just the right thing to do. It's not just the moral imperative, right? We all benefit as a society and a community when we remove impediments to getting back to work and family support, et cetera. When we remove those barriers to allow people to contribute, to support their families, to contribute to the tax base, to pay taxes, to turn their lives around, to then turn around and mentor people in their community. See, this is our part of the social contract that we call criminal justice. It's fair, it's equal, it's right, and it's necessary. Why is that? Because every other portal or access to wealth and to a quality standard of life, the first threshold is criminal history. What's on your criminal history? You want a job, sir or ma'am? We got to do a criminal background check. Would you like to apply for access for benefits, for Section 8, for medical benefits, for any other kind of assistance, for a student loan to get into the military? To get into a special program? What's the first thing you will be asked, ladies and gentlemen? We need to run a criminal background check. It's important to them because that is how they determine who gets access and who does not. And it should be equally important to you. We ought to take our criminal history as seriously as we take our credit report, our reports from our medical doctors, right? Because we want to make sure that for all of us, that there are no hidden or unknown barriers to our success. It's that important. And so that's why we're here to go through the process of expungements, criminal histories, record restrictions, so that we can inform you of the updates in the law and tell you how to make sure you navigate this process successfully. So that's the why. Anybody unclear about the why? Okay, now we talk about the what. And for that, I'm going to ask Nancy DeVetter to come before you and start the discussion by talking about what an expungement is.
Thank you, Shalina. And thank you, Pastor Osborne, for having us here. This place looks amazing. Shalina and I have sat in the basement here before it was renovated, going through GCICs and trying to go through people's record and see what they're eligible for. And it's so amazing and so refreshing to be here and to hear Shalina talk about addressing this issue, because it is such a huge issue and one that we haven't talked about, because we think that people with criminal records are different than other people, and they're not. The numbers are really staggering. Most families, most people have been affected by a criminal record. So to hear an institution like the Chatham County's District Attorney Office taking on this issue and supporting it and trying to move forward with helping people move on towards their lives is just absolutely amazing and refreshing to hear. So I really want to thank Shalina for having me, for doing this, and for supporting these efforts. So I'm going to talk about the nuts and bolts, a little bit about expungement, so that when you leave here, you're going to know more than 99% of Georgians about the law. Thankfully for us, the law in January in 2021 changed significantly, where people before 2021 had extremely limited options to clear their criminal record. And now, literally millions of Georgians now have options to clear their criminal record. So we're going to talk about those options today. And I hope for those who are online and here today, if you'll go and talk to your friends and family about the law change, because this is extremely important. It's important that as many people as possible know that they have new options and new opportunities. People that have researched their option before and came up with, oh, well, I guess I'm stuck with this. Things have changed. And it's a really big deal for Georgia and for our community. So I'm going to talk about expungement, and actually I'm not going to talk about expungement because we do not have expungement in Georgia. I'm going to use the term expungement because that is what most people understand what we're talking about here. We're talking about removing access to a public record. So the definition of expungement is to erase and remove. We don't do that in Georgia. So what we do is we restrict access. We restrict access to who can see it. And for most people, that's good enough because that removes it from an employer, from a landlord, from a background check company, from seeing what happened. However, law enforcement can always see everything. And this is a public safety issue. We want to make sure that even though people have it expunged, might have expunged something, but if they come back and keep on doing the same thing over and over again, that prosecutors know. So generally, the public will not be able to see something once you've restricted it, except for law enforcement and certain employers who work with vulnerable populations. Okay. Yep. So Georgia record restriction is a two-step process. First, you have to restrict the arrest record, and then generally you have to seal the court record. It's important to do both, and we're going to talk about the difference because there's two separate procedures. And some people, for example, have their arrest record restricted, and they call me and they say, why am I still being denied a job? It's because their court record is still available. And the background check companies, a lot of the private corporations that make money off of selling background information, they get their records from the courthouse. So it's extremely important to both restrict your record and then seal it. Unfortunately, you can't really seal it until you've gotten it restricted. So you're stuck usually with the two-part process. Okay, so this is the short list of what is eligible for expungement. And most people have charges that are eligible for expungement. Until this year, non-convictions were the main things that were eligible for expungement. And in my mind, that's how far behind Georgia is, and that it took us until 2013 to even allow charges that you weren't found guilty of to be removed from your record. But that's the Georgia policy that we are trying to recover from. So generally, if you were not found guilty of a charge, and this includes first offender, this includes conditional discharge, this includes diversion, if you weren't found guilty, you are generally eligible to restrict that from your record and then to seal the court record. The law changed this year to also include municipal court cases. So especially in recorder's court here, we like to knock down charges down to disorderly conduct, city ordinance, there's city ordinance violations. And when I do this work, usually I pull the court record because a lot of times clients don't remember what happened in their case. So they think, well, I think that might have been handled by the municipal court, but they're not sure. But the short of it is that if it was reduced to a municipal code violation, it shouldn't be on your record, and it's eligible for expungement and restriction. So the big deal come with these next two. Misdemeanors. Before 2021, if you were found guilty of a misdemeanor, you had no option to expunge it from your record unless you were under 21. Now, there's no age limit. Anyone can restrict a misdemeanor from their record as long as it's been 4 years from their last conviction. There are some charges that aren't eligible, and we'll talk about that for a second. And of course, the biggest one, the biggest impact is a felony conviction. And so many people have felony convictions. And in Georgia, until 2021, even if your felony conviction was from the 70s, it was still stuck on your record forever. And I had many clients who were still denied opportunities because of something they did 50 years ago. But now you have options. You can expunge a felony from your record if you go through the pardon process and get it pardoned. We're going to talk about that a little bit more too. Okay, so first I want to talk about the list of non-convictions, because there's so many ways that a case can end in non-conviction. It can be handled under the First Offender Act, which is considered a non-conviction. It can be dismissed or null prost. It can be handled under conditional discharge. It could be no billed by the jury. Minor possessions are considered non-convictions for the record restriction statute purpose. They're handled under the same section. Drug court, mental health court, veterans court. In some jurisdictions, those cases end up in a dismissal, and those become eligible. Some jurisdictions, you are still, in Chatham County too, drug court and DUI court still end in convictions. So this wouldn't apply to that situation. But here's the short list of things that are considered non-convictions. Dead dockets are something you'd see a lot in state court, and these charges are handled under the simple expungement process that the district attorney is going to talk about soon. These are automatically supposed to be removed from your record after 2013, if the charge was after 2013. I have seen recorder's court sometimes not enter the restriction. It depends on the court. They are responsible for going ahead and automatically restricting these kind of charges if they happened after 2013. If it was before 2013, you have to do a simple 3-page form in order to get it restricted. And again, we're talking about restriction first. After that, you still have to file a motion in the court to get rid of the court record. One thing I want to highlight is the First Offender Act. First Offender Act is an incredible tool and a very powerful tool because it can be used for felonies too. If you never used your first offender, there's a law that came out, I believe in 2016, that allows you to go back and use your first offender now. So I do have clients who have misdemeanor convictions on their record, but it's the only thing on their record. And sometimes we're able to go back and use first offender for that because it turns it into a non-conviction. And of course, for most employers, it matters to them, even if it's expunged. Sometimes they'll still ask you, and unfortunately, in the new great law that we have, they took out the part that said, if it's expunged, you can say, no, I was not arrested, and no, I was not convicted. I'm hoping that we can get that back in the law this year and get it passed. So for currently, it's very important to use your first offender if that's an option, because then you can honestly say, I've never been convicted. All right, so here's a brief summary of the misdemeanor conviction restriction that is now available. Like we talked about, this used to not be available for people unless they were under 21. It is now available for everyone. You can only use it twice, so you have to be strategic if you have more than 2 misdemeanor convictions. You might want to consider using your First Offender Act or making sure that you're not using your restriction option on something that is expungement under the other parts of the statute. There are certain things that you cannot expunge. DUIs are generally not expungible. Sex crimes are not expungible. Most thefts are not expungible. Shoplifting is, which is an exception. And family violence is generally not expungible. If you have one of those, then you have to look back to see if something like first offender would be an option for you. Or you can go through the pardon process as well. These require a little more work. These have to be motions that are filed in a court case in order to get these approved. And you have to prove to the court that these charges are harming you in some way. So for someone, I've had plenty of clients that have 20 plus things on their record and multiple felonies. So for them, sometimes the court has said, look, this isn't a big deal. I'm not going to expunge these records because your real problem is your felonies. So it is something to think about, and I do encourage, if you are going to go through this process, to talk to an attorney about your options, so that you make sure that you use the right procedure and that you use it on the right thing. All right, and the big guns, felony conviction restriction. Again, this is new, starting in January 2021. This is a huge opportunity. This allows felonies to be pardoned, felonies that have been pardoned to be expunged and sealed. So the trick here, of course, is going through the pardon process. The pardon process has its own requirements. It requires you to have been off paper for 5 years and crime-free, which they define as not having any misdemeanor probation for 5 years. So because Georgia puts people on probation so long, you might have a 15-year-old charge that you're still on paper for. And there's another law that can trigger here that just went into effect this summer, which is that we are finally trying to get everyone off probation that is eligible. There's a new law that allows people to end their probation early as long as they have been on probation successfully for 3 years. So for my clients that have been on probation for 10, 12 years, you can now talk to your probation office as long as you haven't been revoked in the last 3 years for, and not a technical violation, a reoffend violation, then you can ask your probation officer to end your probation early. Once you're off probation, you can think about the pardon process. There is the 5-year waiting period, but there's ways to get around it. You can ask for the Board of Pardons and Paroles to waive the 5-year rule if you can show that it's the reason you're not getting a job in your career. If it's a reason you can't adopt a child, if it's a reason you can't get into subsidized housing, you can show good cause. You can get that 5-year period waived. It is rare, but it's because you have to come up with pretty good evidence. But once you're off paper, the process, you can start thinking about this pardon process. If you get the pardon approved, you can then file to expunge and seal the charge. There are certain charges that are not eligible even if you get them pardoned. Technically, you can get anything pardoned, including sex offenses. There's a separate, longer period for sex offenses, but it is an option. But there are, even if you get these charges pardoned, if you get a serious violent charge pardoned, you can't expunge it, unfortunately. And we're talking about the 7 deadly sins: murder, felony murder, aggravated, armed robbery, kidnapping, and rape, and aggravated charges. So if you get the pardon, that is still significant, and a lot of employers still use a pardon to determine whether or not you'd be a good fit for employment. But the pardon, you can't get it expunged if you still have those certain charges. Okay, I hope I haven't bored you guys too much with all the legalese and the new law. Now you know everything. Okay, so I hope you understand now what an expungement is and what it is not. And I say expungement, we're talking about record restriction. A pardon is a separate process. If you have a federal offense, this does not apply to you. Unfortunately, there are extremely limited circumstances for federal expungements and for federal pardons. Certain misdemeanors and certain felonies are not going to be eligible. But when we look at the numbers for what people are arrested for, 90% of people have misdemeanors and have non-violent felonies. So this is for you. You now have options to remove those from your record. Would you like me to do practical tips too, or would you like to jump back in here?
So those were the fast and furious details of the new updates of expungement law. And now we kind of want to go back to real life a little bit and kind of talk about, past the technicalities of whether you fall in the right box or category. What do you do if you have a criminal history? What is the best way for you to navigate all of this? Well, you heard me mention at the outset that checking your criminal history and knowing your status is as important in the criminal history context as it is for your credit report. Financial advisors might say you should pull a copy of your credit history at least once, even twice per year, so that you know what's on it. Trust me when I tell you that no one wants to get that unsuspected blue light getting pulled over for a traffic citation, only to find out that there is either a warrant out there or some hanging charge that maybe you forgot to go to court on or something like that, that could have been avoided. Getting arrested is really inconvenient. And that's true if you're guilty or innocent, right? So let's avoid that headache where possible. You can request a copy of your criminal history. Your GCIC report is what they call it. You can request that from the GBI. You can visit the GBI's website and enter a request to view that. You can also pay a visit to your local police department or sheriff's department, and they'll usually run a copy of that for you for a nominal fee. Usually it's between $10 and $25 if you want to know what's on it. But there are several ways for you to get your GCIC and your criminal history, and we recommend that you do that on a regular basis. But beyond knowing your record, which is important, when it comes to applying for jobs, we have found that it's a good practical tip to be upfront with employers about what you think is or may be on your criminal history. Why is that? It's an opportunity for you to get ahead of it, and it's an opportunity for your employer to see you as honest and forthcoming instead of hiding something. It also helps where a person is, let's say, guilty and they have a conviction on their criminal history to take responsibility and put that in the right context during the application or interview process. It may be helpful if you think you're going to be nervous about it to prepare a statement in advance that you can share with employers up front, like a written statement that you could leave with an application so that they can consider you for that. And explain to them why they should hire you. There are other things to emphasize. If the criminal history or the incident took place a long time ago, if you've changed since then, if you have other letters of reference from the community that could support your application, if you show yourself as responsible, if you've completed school, if you have a special skill set or vocational training that's essential to the job, all these things are helpful, not to sidestep criminal history, but to show why you as a candidate add value and why that should not be, what's on the criminal history should not be a hindering block for you. And as always, if you think you might be eligible for a record restriction, just ask. I'll tell you how to do that in just a short while. So what do you do if you're someone out there and you think that the information on your criminal history is incorrect? How many of you have actually ever seen a criminal history before? Print out. Not Michael, Vince, y'all be quiet. Hey, Lane. If for those of you who might not know, they look like this. This is a copy of a criminal history report that has been redacted to protect the identity of the innocent, or not, depending on how you look at it. This is a criminal history. But what you'll find, you can't see it from up there, is that a criminal history report has a plethora of information about a person on it. It has their date of birth, their social security number, different variations of their name if they have it, their height, weight, all that kind of biographical identification and information. And then on the criminal history, you'll see it lists every event that a person has had interaction with law enforcement. And from the arrest itself up until the disposition, that's considered a cycle, right? And so the arresting agency might say, I arrested Shalina Jones. Let's not use Shalina Jones. I arrested Jane Doe, for X offense on this date, right? So that will be the beginning of the cycle. That'll show the agency that made the arrest, what the person was charged with at the time they were arrested, and the level of charge it is, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony. So let's suppose that case, that arrest, actually makes its way to the sheriff's department and the person gets booked into the jail. Then there are fingerprints that are taken and that are made, and then that becomes part of the cycle too, because the sheriff's department will add something to this GCIC that says, Jane Doe was arrested for X on this day and booked into the jail. So after Jane Doe is booked into the jail, that Jane Doe's case might go and make its way to the court, either to recorder's court or something to that effect. If it's not resolved there, it'll make its way to the DA's office, where Jane might be charged with a misdemeanor or a felony by either being accused or indicted. That will show up in the cycle. And then if the case goes to court and it's resolved, either Jane Doe has a trial, she pleads guilty, or the case is ultimately dismissed, all of that will appear on the cycle, on the criminal history as well. I'm saying this to let you know that it's very important that you know exactly what's on your criminal history, because that's a lot of hands touching Jane Doe's case, but between the time she was arrested and the time her case was actually resolved. And that means that as long as the system involves humans, that means that there's room for error. So you want to make sure that every entry, even if it's just one case, every entry having to do with that case is accurate. It's also important because we're talking about this issue or this distinction between restricting and sealing. So what happens when a record is restricted is that the GBI, or the Georgia Criminal Information Center, gets a notice to restrict your record. And so it'll show up that that's restricted, but as Nancy explained to you, that does not control the clerk of court, the court website, and other places that your information might appear. Many of you know that you can go and search for a case on the Chatham County website. Just because you got that record restricted on your criminal history does not mean that someone, an employer perhaps, or a school that you're applying to, can't go Google you or enter your name in the county where you live to see if there's any record of arrest that's being maintained by the clerk's office or by the court. And all of the records that are filed by the clerk's office are public records. They are available for public view. And that's why step 2, sealing, is so absolutely critical to the expungement process, because you can tell the GBI and the GCI folks to direct the arresting law enforcement agency to restrict that record, but they do not restrict the records that are being held and processed by other entities, okay? So it's important to know that. Different types of information on your criminal history and record, and you need to make sure that all of it is correct. You can request that the agency that put the information on there modify, correct, supplement, or amend the information, and that they notify the GCIC. Typically, if you have to do this, it's for convictions that took place before July 1st of 2013. Under Georgia law, if your arrest, not your conviction, if the arrest took place, if it happened before July 1st of 2013, then you have to go to the arresting law enforcement agency to begin or initiate your restriction process. If it's happened after July 1st, 2013, then you don't have to apply to the law enforcement agency. If it happened here in Chatham County, what you can do is contact our office in a way that I'll show you how in just a second, to complete a form, and that form will be reviewed and you'll be contacted about the status of your request, okay? But if you're doing this by yourself, which you can do, or if you hire a lawyer to do this, which they will do, after you contact the agency and wait 60 days, if that agency fails to respond, then you can file a petition with the court and have the court make a decision about whether or not that expungement should be granted, and you need to provide a notice to the arresting agency and to the DA's office. Now, I'm telling you that this is information that I am providing to you as citizens of Chatham County because you fall within this jurisdiction. A few minutes ago, Mr. Vetter told you what an expungement was or was not. Now, what you should know is if your expungement, we process your expungements that occurred here in Chatham County, right? If your arrest and conviction took place in Atlanta, in Macon, or somewhere else, you need to see them. I'll say it again. We process all requests for expungement or record restriction for incidents that happen specifically after July 1st, 2013, and in Chatham County. Okay? So here's a question that I like to ask questions that I'd like to address questions that I think you might be asking. Because this is a question I would be asking if I were you. Do I need a lawyer? Well, unfortunately, I don't have a clear response for you. The answer is, it depends, okay? If your incident or arrest happened after when? July 2013, good. And if it happened where? All right, then, and if it's for a non-conviction, remember Nancy told you about non-convictions? First offenders, dismissals, completement of pretrial diversion, if we never charged it, if it's been dead docketed for longer than 12 months, etc. Those are things that our office will help you to process. And as a new service, new meaning as of now, as a new service that we are offering to our citizens in Chatham County, you can go onto our website at www.chathamcountyda.com and fill out a Google form that collects your information. We will then process it for you. If you are eligible for a record restriction under the rules that Nancy and I have discussed with you, we will process that restriction and assist you in moving to seal that record. Okay, if it's a non-conviction, okay? So, in that instance, you might not need an attorney. However, if your case requires you, if it's before, all right, streaming audience, I think y'all can do better than everybody sitting in here. July 1st, 2013, good. If it's before then, if it occurred outside of Chatham County, if it is one of those other kinds of restrictions, like the new one for misdemeanors that requires a court hearing, or the one for felonies, or if you had first offender or should have been, if you had first offender and you satisfied first offender, but it's still on your record, we can handle that. But if you had a conviction, you were eligible for first offender, but you didn't know it, you probably need an attorney to help you with that, to file the motion to show to the court that you are eligible for first offender. Those are the kinds of issues that have to be decided by a judge. And although we're here to offer you wonderful customer service, we are still prosecutors, and so you'll need someone to represent your interests before the court, okay? So those are the rough guidelines between the types of things we can do and assist you with, in which you might not need an attorney per se, or in the types of things that you will probably most likely need an attorney for. But if you ever have a question about that, again, as I said, you can go to the website, fill out the form, and you'll get specific information about what the next steps are in your case, okay? Now, I say that and let me say this, because I would be remiss to not say this. This is a prosecutor's office, okay? I always recommend that if you are on the other side of the state in any way, strongly consider hiring an attorney. I don't want to be on record giving you advice saying, no, you don't need a lawyer, and I'm telling you, the good folks at the Chatham County DA's office, we're going to take good care of you. However, it is an adversarial system, so you never do wrong by consulting counsel like Nancy DeVetter and some other attorneys out there who might practice the same area of law. Okay? So, how can I apply? Step one, as we said, always obtain and review a copy of your criminal record. That'll help you determine whether or not you even need to go any further. Again, if the challenged incident occurred before July 2013, contact the arresting law enforcement agency to request a restriction. If the challenged incident occurred after July 2013, you can contact our office to initiate the process or access the restriction request form at our website, which is there. And we will review that request and provide you a written response as to the status of it within about 90 days. Okay, good question. Are those for non-convictions only? If it happened the Google form that you fill out will actually drive your inquiry and will tell us what you need and what you're looking for. We will write back to you to let you know if it's a non-conviction, what our next steps will be, and that we'll process it, or we'll tell you that this is not something that can be handled by our office, that you might need to consult an attorney, etc. Okay? I know that was a lot of information. It's packed really densely. And for those who either might have missed part of it or some of the presentation, it will be available and uploaded to our website within the next 24 to 48 hours for you to watch this information again if you need to go over it. Also, if you, again, the Google form, you'll find that on the website, which will, you can complete that, hit submit, and it automatically gets sent over electronically to our office.
Shalina, can I jump in to
Sure. Please
talk
do.
about the do I need a lawyer piece? Because this is something that I want people to know, that there are, as you've seen, different avenues for different kinds of cases. And here's what I tell clients. If it's a non-conviction, you are usually entitled to the expungement. And those are the kind of things that the Chatham County, that Shalina and the DA's office are saying, look, we can probably take care of that for you. And that is an enormous opportunity. No other counties are doing this. Fulton in Atlanta has done a summit similarly, but having that opportunity where for the stuff that you are entitled to expungement, to submit a form online and have the DA take care of it and the expungement and the sealing is an enormous opportunity. For things that aren't, aren't non-convictions and that you're not entitled to, then it's a more difficult process. You have to file a motion in court. A lot of the municipal courts are coming up with their own procedures. For example, Pooler has a one-page form. So I say, okay, if you have a municipal code violation in Pooler, go ahead and do it on your own because they have a simple form for you to do. I also tell clients that pardons are normally something that you can do on your own. The pardon application is extremely intense, gives you your whole life history. But if it's been a long time since you've had a felony conviction and it's the only felony on your record, or you have a couple of nonviolent felonies that are 20 years old, then a pardon is probably something that you can do on your own successfully. If you have more recent issues and you're trying to get that 5-year rule waived, we know from our data that you're more likely to get approved if you have an attorney help you with it. So just something to keep in mind when you're making that decision. But either way, I think it's important to talk to an attorney and to let them tell you what their options are. I always tell my clients what I think they might be able to do on their own and what they might need my help with. Whenever we're going for retroactive first offender, that requires prosecutorial consent, so I always recommend an attorney for that because you have to reach out to the prosecutor. Most prosecutors are not going to call you back if you're unrepresented. They just assume that you're a random defendant and that that you have an attorney at some point. So it's extremely difficult to handle that kind of issue on your own. So I think I've explained a lot, and let me pass this on to the Honorable Representative Gilliard.
Thank you. Good evening to my brothers and sisters, and Madam DA and Nancy. I was sitting in the back, and I don't know how many years ago we started doing this at the empowerment, so maybe 2 years ago. So Nancy is a passionate advocate for what she's doing. And she came to me about doing this because I have programs in the Chatham County jails. I'm on the board dealing with prisons and jails for the state. And she said, I want to try to focus on what we can do to help returning citizens who have things on their record, i.e. expungement. She's the best. I started hearing people come back and saying, she really did a great job. And every situation is different. Every person is different. Everybody's past is different. But make no mistakes, what the district attorney has done that's very profound is to let you get the information up front where you don't have to show up. And then when you show up and say, you told me you were going to help me. Because remember, everyone's situation is different. People started getting their rights returned to them. And I'm very proud to say that Nancy DeVetter is truly one of the best. So if you're looking for that additional counsel, make sure that you get someone that's passionate about what they're doing. You have a district attorney who is breaking the cycle, breaking the norm, and she's putting everything she can to make sure that we give people their rights back. Is that all right? Can we give her a hand? Can we give Nancy a hand? And let me say this. I have a bill that I'm going to drop. You know, I always file my legislation early. It's called time served. What that means is that person goes and serves their time. Why should I discriminate and profile them on their job application? Why should I profile them on their application to get housing? They serve their time. Georgia has to step to the plate and do what is right for returning citizens. Oh, we've all done some stuff. A lot of us just didn't get caught. Amen? And so my thing is that we in the state of Georgia have got to do better to treat our returning citizens who have done their time and give them a first citizenship right to have access to what they need to live. Is that okay with you all? So when you hear about that bill being filed, I need your help. I don't need you to call the regular persons that you know are going to support the bill. But the power of a phone call, an email by thousands of Georgians goes a long way. Because guess what? This doesn't know any ethnicity, any gender. It doesn't know any territory. We have truly all fallen short of the glory of God. So, you know, we're passionate about what we're doing. This is not just one event. I'm all in with the district attorney's office. I'm all in with Attorney Nancy DeVetter, who is also City Councilwoman Nancy DeVetter out of Tybee. So what happens is we get so passionate about what we're doing, and we say to ourselves, all three, we can't just sit there. We've got to do something. Are you with me? So I've learned we can do more together than apart. Are you feeling me tonight? That's why we're here tonight, with a passion to bring returning citizens. And you know, when you get people, Nancy, you know, 40 years ago, this is still on my record. 30 years ago. Is that right? You tell me, is that right? So we've got to challenge those things and put the work in, put the time in. I'll tell you a quick story. A young man who is one of the operation managers at one of the top companies in Savannah said to me, I want my rights back. I feel I should be able to carry. I want my rights back. He did everything that he was supposed to do. He went through the channel to do everything. He's an operation manager that hires for a major company. And the first person he's going to hire are those who are the have and the have-nots. Are you feeling me tonight? And he did everything through all the paperwork, through following the yellow brick road. And he got every one of his rights back. Bought him a house, did everything. He's rolling, and he's bringing other people up. So each one reach one. I'm here tonight. I'm all in. My office is all in. We have the Democratic caucus down here this weekend, and the Black caucus, and all the above. So I apologize about being late, but they're all in too. And when we drop this bill, we want you to be all in. It's called the Time Served Act, ACT, and you'll hear about it in early November.
Thank you, Representative Gilliard, and thank you for being thinking enough of us and enough of this effort and cause to take time out of your busy schedule to be here with us on tonight. It takes people like you, it takes a village to raise awareness, to educate, and to make the kind of change that we want to see in our communities. And it takes everybody, from elected officials, DAs, law enforcement, all the way down to community workers and citizens. It takes everyone. And so I'm glad that you thought enough of us to stop by on tonight. That means a lot. Now, it's a few minutes after 7, and we're gonna go a little bit longer. And now I'm gonna switch hats from being the instructor to now being the moderator of our panel discussion, okay? And so that means that everybody in here gets to come up to this mic right here and ask questions of our panel members. And for those of you who are watching online and you're part of our streaming audience, if you put your question in the chat, we'll do our best to address your question from here, okay? So I'm gonna start off with the first question. Representative Gilliard, many people have said to me as a district attorney, why would you be focused on expungements? Seemed to me you're more concerned about defendants than victims. I'm sure you hear that a lot in your discourse with citizens. If you do, what is your response to that? If people say, well, this is defendant friendly and I don't like it, and we should be focused more on victims, and I don't think this helps victims. How do you respond to that when you hear that?
Well, it's twofold. Here again, the victim, first of all, deserves our support and our total support and our encouragement. But that person, if they've done anything to that victim, here again, they've served their time. The other part of it is when companies come to me all the time, and the number one thing we hear is that we got all these jobs, we got all the skilled labor, but we can't find the skilled labor. We can't find the people that want to work. There are people that want to work, you just haven't given them the opportunity to work. And so it's twofold. And then going back again, if those persons have served their time, then it's time to move forward. And so Georgia has that responsibility right now to help others be able to move forward and also to embrace those returning citizens.
I just want to echo Carl's, thought in that, when is the debt paid? And that is a great conference that Dr. Maxine Bryant at Georgia Southern puts on to say, how long are we going to punish people? People that have served their time and paid their restitution that are still being affected decades later. So we have a criminal justice system to address, harm that has occurred, but it is designed to address that. But the problem is that even after you're done and off probation, that you still are punished. There's a stigma, employers have a stigma. We ask people about their criminal record. I mean, I've had clients who've been denied jobs for 20-year-old disorderly conducts. And it just blows my mind that the thought process, especially for employers, is that people with criminal records are somehow not as qualified as others. Because generally, that's just not the case. And in my experience, people that have a criminal record are excellent workers because they struggle to get good work. And the other thing we don't talk about is that good employment is directly related to recidivism. If people have a good job, they don't get in trouble anymore. So this is why we need to do this work.
One of the other practices that has historically been true for prosecutors is that they will give in a sentence, for example, in a plea, a time served offer with an extended amount of probation, right? Well, the reason that that's problematic is because, well, I won't say problematic. Maybe I should call Chief Simmons up here to address that. But one of the things that's important about that is that when somebody is on probation, almost always, they sign a waiver of their Fourth Amendment right. Does anybody know what your Fourth Amendment constitutional right is? Not you, Chief. We know you. That's right. It's your constitutional right to be free from illegal search and seizure. Well, what that means is that if you are on paper, then let me ask Chief Simmons. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what this means? I'm coming over there with the microphone. What is the impact of a Fourth Amendment waiver on a sentence for a probationer?
The impact kind of, like she said, it's more so looked at from the sentence standpoint of them being able to be searched for anything illegal during the time that they're under sentence. They do waive that right, so any time that we have reasonable suspicion or probable cause, mostly reasonable suspicion to think that they may have something that they're not supposed to have that would violate that sentence of probation, that does give us the right to go in and conduct a search of their property, as well as any area under their control in the home in which they live.
And so essentially, when a person is on an extended period of probation, what they've done is waived at least one of their significant constitutional rights and protections, which makes them more vulnerable to encounters with law enforcement and with police, and that becomes problematic. As a DA, I don't know if I should say that, but it's the truth. And so what we know is that the longer amount of time that a person stays on paper, on probation, it sets them up to fail, because there are fines, fees, visitation, and special conditions, and then general conditions of probation that they have to meet while they're on there. So thank you for answering that question. This guy is Chief Simmons, who's the man in charge at probation. So, and they work in tandem with our office. Very, very pleased to have you here tonight, sir. So, do we have any questions from any folks in the audience about anything you've heard tonight? Just step right up to the mic and we'll get you.
Good afternoon. And I guess this question may be directed to Nancy. I'm an employer here in Savannah, and I have employed folks on probation. And you're right, they do. They appreciate their jobs. They really do. But they've come to me at times when they needed legal help, and they're like, we can't afford an attorney. Is this something that would qualify for any kind of legal assistance for someone who is looking to expunge a record, or do they have to come up with the money out of pocket? Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question. And actually, Georgia Legal Services is the local nonprofit law firm that does this work. That actually used to be my job. In October, I went and started doing this work out on my own. But there is an attorney at Georgia Legal Services that specializes in expungement through a grant through the United Way, which is wonderful. But then we also have this new portal through the DA's office for people to submit some record restrictions. Some of them, I mean, I do free consultation, so I can tell someone, well, this is something that you could do on your own. And also something that Carl and I and Shalene have talked about doing is doing, expungement clinics too, where people can come in, they can sit down with an attorney. And we used to do that at this very church, where people come in with their records, they sit down with a volunteer attorney. We go through everything that they're eligible for, and some things they can do on their own. And then some things are a little more complicated, and you want to hire an attorney. I wish there were more resources out there. The Georgia Justice Project is the main organization in Atlanta. Excuse me. And they are statewide. I do statewide services as well. But all of us have been so overwhelmed with the new expungement law that went into effect in January that I know Georgia Justice Project is I think, putting up people on hold, and Georgia Legal Services the same. So I'm hoping that we as a community can do a clinic. We had talked about doing that, and then COVID has kind of put pause on that.
Nancy, you'll notice that we titled this expungement clinic Phase 1. And part of the reason we did that is because we know that there's a lot of new information we wanted to get to the community about what an expungement is and what is not. We really wanted to avoid a situation where people show up and flood the courthouse and hundreds of people show up at one time, some of whom may be eligible, some of whom are not. But phase 2 will be a clinic in the sense that, so after today, once we start receiving requests about expungements, for those that we're able to handle outright, we can handle those outright. For those who need more in-depth attention, at that time, we'll collect those applications and then schedule a clinic for them to sit down with an attorney like Nancy. We've had a lot of other great attorneys in our community who've been willing to donate their time to this cause. But that way, we will have identified those people who are, gotten rid of those people who either don't qualify or who we could take care of easily, and then set specific appointments for those people who need further attention. So what you'll have to do is stay in touch with us, keep checking the website. In or around the next 90 days or so, we'll have some idea as to how many applications we've gotten, and then try to look forward to scheduling a clinic at that time.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. We got a question from our streaming audience that said, as to your statement, Representative Gilliard, about the legislation on this issue, who should our citizens call when the bill drops?
Let me give you a prime example, and I always try to file my bills early. How many of you have heard of Georgia's citizen arrest repeal? A law that was written in 1863, a law that was a legal way to lynch black people. That's what it was. And so I dropped the bill early. We lobbied for it, we educated people, and the people rallied all over the state, black and white. We got that bill, that law is repealed now, it's gone. Ahmaud Arbery might be alive today if that law were in effect. Are you with me? 202,000 blind people could not become parents if they were blind. So I filed early the blind bill. We lobbied across the state of Georgia. We got that bill passed so blind citizens can be parents. So when this bill drops early, the significance is we can educate one another. You would call all of your senators that are in the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, all of your House of Representatives, Democrat and Republican, and the Speaker and the Governor. And the importance of that is that that bill is filed. It will sit there unless that chairman or chairwoman gives that bill a hearing. So your phone calls, your emails are important because it'll just sit there because the status quo doesn't want change. Are you with me? If you think that they want to give those returning citizens the right to have time served when people make misery off of money off of misery, are you with me? When people make a living off of prisons and jails, are you with me today? And so the importance of it is the people of the state of Georgia educating others and not, and let me say this, when you call, you don't have to be an agitator. You can be an educator. Let those senators and representatives know this is the right thing to do. That's what those citizens that were blind did. That's what we did with the citizen arrest repeal. And I believe this is Georgia's bill for 2022, that when we give people their rights back, time served, they can, the district attorney said one powerful thing. I think Nancy said it too. When you can eat and you can take care of your family, there's probably a mindset that you don't want to commit a crime. The poverty rate in Chatham County is ridiculous. Over 26, 27%. Don't talk about Garden City and others. So if that person can take care of their family and those babies, I have a class going on right now in the Chatham County Jail called New Beginnings. And one of the things we ask, how many of you are parents? They raise their hand. They're stressed out because when they return home, they're trying to scratch their head and say, how am I going to make it? When I get ready to put that application in, and they say, in 1920, you slapped somebody. 40 years ago, you did this, 10 years, 5 years. So all you have to do is just stick with us. We're going to constantly keep it out there. We're going to constantly educate, but we need everyone to educate each other. And I guarantee you, we can move this bill forward.
Thank you, Representative Gilliard. Is there a way, one of the things that I think is so empowering about town hall events like this, and you being here on tonight, is that we are removing the veil, the cloak of anonymity off of the legal system, the legislative process, etc. This is the day for citizens of our county to be aware of the political and legal issues that affect them, to vote in accordance with their conscience, and to hold their elected officials responsible. So if you want to find out about this particular bill and when it drops, the best way to do that is to follow the representative who's going to be responsible for ushering the bill through. And so if that's the case, Representative Gilliard, how can our citizens follow you so that they know how to keep up with this legislation?
You can see me walking down on Hazard County I'm just kidding, I'm sorry. I lost myself for a minute. I thought I was home. There are a couple of ways. We have a local number here in Savannah, 912-436-5325, 912-436-5325. So we're local. We have the Empowerment Center across from Groves High School, where Groves High School was. My office in Atlanta is 404-656-7859. That's 404-656-7859. You can email me at carl.gilliard@house.ga.gov. All of that is public information. If you Google, you'll get my email, my Facebook, Twitter, and all the above. But the most important, we have boots on the ground. We have a legislative council of citizens. Join the team. My legislative council tells me that there's some other ears I need to be listening to. Do you know about this? Do you know about that? And so they help me write the vision and make it plain. That's what the Bible says. Write the vision and make it plain. And so my legislative council are everybody. Watch this, from Dr. So-and-so to Pookie and Kwan, my street committee. Are you with me? Everybody that wants to be involved, with no respect of person. And so we need you involved. That's the only way we're going to get something done, and we'd love for you to be involved.
Thank you. Nancy?
Oh, one great, Georgia Justice Project in Atlanta has a great email list that you can sign up for, and they are great with telling people these are the criminal justice reform efforts, bills that have been passed. This is the day you need to call your representative. I have an email list for my law firm too, where as soon as we schedule this clinic, I'm going to send out a blast. So I definitely recommend joining the Georgia Justice Project newsletter and mine as well. Do you have a newsletter? Okay, I need to be on it.
And as always, you can always check your friendly DA's website for updates about the law and other important things you need to know. Now, one last question. It is a legislative question. We got a question online for someone who wanted to know what the Time Served Act was. And I know that you also touched on, you made a comment but didn't use the terminology, the ban the box legislation. Can you explain to our listeners what those are and give them a little more detail about each?
Years ago, there was a great group of women from all over Georgia, 9 to 5, that was focusing on the ban the box efforts. And basically, as you put it in the application, they always ask you this great question: have you ever committed a crime? And so you have the right, because of that ban the box movement, that I think now they don't really have them on all the.
Many governments have banned the box in Georgia, which means they do not ask you about your criminal record until the later stages of hiring. So the Savannah City Council passed something. We also have a pending ordinance to clarify that. The state of Georgia has done it. However, the bill that would require private employers to remove that question has not passed. So I'm hoping we can get some momentum on that too. Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, there's a lot we didn't cover tonight, including private background checks, and that is a big one. Is what are your rights with your criminal record? And there is guidance from the government that basically says an employer cannot discriminate against you based only on your criminal record. Now, what the EEOC requires is that that an employer, for example, have what's called a business necessity to know what your criminal history is. So that means if a truck driving company is going to hire you, then it's okay if they ask if you've had a DUI, right? And maybe to use a DUI against you. There's other laws that cover if you have child cruelty, then you can't work at a daycare. That makes sense. All right, those may be considered business necessities. But I've heard from employers that say, well, we don't hire anyone with a criminal record. That wouldn't fly under the Civil Rights Act. That would be a violation of that law because the result is that it discriminates against people with criminal records, and it becomes actually a racial discrimination argument. Of course, historically, people of color have been arrested and prosecuted more than non-people of color. So we have a racial discrimination argument. So we can get in the weeds a little bit about how this plays out, but the short of it is that if you are denied a job and you believe it's because of your criminal record, first you have the right to know that you've been denied a job because of your criminal record. The employer, if you ask, has to tell you that. And if they used a criminal background check, to provide that criminal background check to you, that is your right. The other thing is that an employer has to have a business necessity if they are going to deny you a job based on your background. It has to be related to the work that you're doing. So, if you're going to be at the front desk of, a retail shop, then your criminal record probably isn't relevant for any of the tasks that you do. If you have a theft charge or a fraud charge, those are my hardest issues to deal with employers. But misdemeanor marijuana, old drug felonies, that's not going to be relevant unless maybe you're working at a hospital and you have access to narcotics. So most employers do not know this rule, and I've had to deal with employers who say, well, we know it when we see it, and then I push back and say, okay, let me see your policy, and then they quietly hire my client. So if you do have an employer who is saying they don't hire anyone with a criminal record, I'd love to know.
That's great information to know that. So does anyone here in the audience have any questions before we wrap? It's 7:30. Oh, sure, please, come forward.
I'm a victim of simple battery. It happened 24 years ago. And now I'm in the process of trying to get my license, which I already got my license, the legal private process. Well, that's hindering me for getting a concealed weapon. To carry a concealed weapon, because I have that simple battery DVA. And I filed the paperwork with the DA's office, and I got the denial letter for the expungement. So that happened 24 years ago, and it's hindering me from getting that license.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. Call
And
Nancy.
I spoke with you too.
I was going to say, call Nancy.
I did. I talked to her.
We need one of those fast 1-800 call Nancy numbers.
But I called her when I was trying to seek this expungement, and she talked to me about it, and she told me to go to the DA's office, and I did, and I got the denial letter last weekend in the mail.
So it was a domestic violence conviction?
It was a domestic violence misdemeanor. I was defending myself in the direct, and it was a simple battery in recorder's court. I filed with the district attorney's office for expungement, received the denial letter on last weekend. So what do I do now? So now I do have the...
Did I talk to you because you used to work with...
I used to work with Stephanie Burgess.
Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah,
as her paralegal. So
yeah.
What do I do now? Because now I have my own business as a legal private processor, and I want to have a gun. I want to carry a gun when I go serve people. Their paperwork, their legal documents. So what do I do now? Because I tried the expungement without paying the money for an attorney. What do I do now? That happened 24 years ago.
Right, so I think you used the record restriction process, which is not the correct process for a conviction. I think we talked, we were like, well, maybe this would work,
That's
but,
correct, and you told me to go to
right.
the DA's office, and I did.
Yeah.
That's when we stopped at. I
and
just-
then, right, so the next step would be, because I assume you were over 21 when this happened.
Yes, I was probably 24. And
So-
back then, the first offender was not in place.
Right, so your option would be to go for retro first offender, or you could go through the pardon process where you could also get your gun rights restored. Now, for misdemeanor pardon restoration, you have to show that it's preventing you from accessing some sort of benefit, but it sounds like you would qualify for that. So I think you do have two paths, and I remember that you said you were between jobs, and, you know.
And now I do have a job. Yes, I was in between jobs because I was in the process of trying to open up my own business. So now I do have a legit job besides my business. So that's where we're at.
So I think you would have two different paths.
Okay.
But unfortunately, the path we thought that you might be able to work didn't work.
That's correct.
But I think you'll have other options.
Awesome.
I think the
Awesome.
other option might be, and this is lawyering, you know, I think the other option might be that if your concern is primarily being able to carry a firearm, then there's a petition that she could file with the probate court.
I did file that,
did
and I
y'all?
got it denied. I went, I paid the money. Okay, 'cause I know when I went to the court, he mentioned to me, when I went before the judge in probate court, paid the money for that, paid for the promotion and all additional money for the motion, and he mentioned to me, go to the DA's office and see about getting an expungement or seek an attorney, and so that's why I call you.
Yeah.
I want to jump in just a parable. I think that qualifies that young man that I was talking about through the state, through the pardon and parole. Let me check into that because I think that's the route he took. His whole focus was just to carry and get his rights back for a firearm. So I'll check into that on tomorrow morning, but I think it goes on the state level. You could go that way
Okay,
also.
sounds good. I'll be sitting right here after.
Thank you. Chief Simmons. Okay. See what happens when you come to date night? You get special gifts and legal services. We hook you up.
I just wanted to say that a lot of what our office does, I mean, I know we do felony probation and parole here in the state of Georgia, but a lot of what our office does is things to help people understand that they will have a chance to have their rights restored. At sentencing, when they come in for probation intake, we have them sign a restoration of rights form. It lets them know, hey, at the end of your sentence, this is the process that you would take. Now you look at it, if you got a 20-year sentence, you sign that paper, 20 years go by, you may not remember that you signed that paper. If anybody ever wants to get that application, that document, it's on the State Board of Pardons and Parole website. One thing that's I would like to point out is if you ever need your rights restored, your right to vote is automatically restored. All you have to do is re-register to vote. That's not anything you have to file.
Say that again for the people in the back.
Your right to vote is automatically restored. Only thing you have to do is go down to the registrar's office in your local voters registration office, and you can re-register to vote once your sentence is completed. But all your other rights, you do have to go through that process. It is a packet of information. I'll give you.
Now, Chief Simmons said, y'all listen in Chatham County. Chief Simmons said that your right to vote is automatically restored once you complete your sentence. All you have to do is re-register to vote.
Correct.
Somebody put that in the chat. Put that in the chat. Y'all put that in the chat.
So if ever you need that information as far as the restoration of rights, you can go to the State Board of Pardons and Parole website, and you'll see it on there. And as well as the actual whole process is drawn out for you. You can download the application, have some if anybody else needs some tonight.
And then if you'll get my email, I'll follow up with my office and we'll make sure that we're watching the process of it.
Chief Simmons, he said it. I'll take it to the bank. That's good. Thank you. Anyone else have any questions before we close? Come on up to the microphone. Yeah, but I want the people to hear you because I bet it's good. All questions are good, right? There might be somebody out there in TV land who has the same question, and they should hear you.
Absolutely. Good evening.
Good evening.
To my understanding, the right to bear arms, if you do have a felony conviction, after you complete your sentence, which would be your whatever your incarcerated sentence is, as well as parole or probation, do you still have to wait a consecutive 5 years after that sentence before?
To get your gun rights restored and to ask for a general pardon, there's a 5-year waiting period from the end of your sentence. There is a waiver process to get the 5-year rule waived. If you can show that that you need a pardon, basically you need a letter from someone that says, look, I'm not gonna hire this guy unless he gets a pardon.
Understand.
And then you can get the 5-year rule waived. It's rare, but it's because no one submits the right evidence when they ask for it.
And that 5-year rule, where did that come from?
That's, the pardon board gets to make their own rules. They,
Are
there's no appeal of a pardon. It's a very, unregulated process.
And
So
and is that regulated by the governor or?
there's a pardon board that's put together, and they, so I assume they would be they're appointed by the governor.
Okay. And my last question, Mr. Gilliard, this time served act you have, what does that detail? Does it detail anything about the particular 5-year past? Because it seems like if you finish the sentence and you finish the probated part, the parole part of your sentence, why the additional 5 years before, just trying to figure out, where does that come from? Because like the district attorney said, sometimes you have people that have an extended probated sentence, something do 10 years, and then after the 10 years, you still wait another 5 years. Seems like after a person has completed 10 years successfully of probation, why would we wait a whole nother 5 years before giving him his rights or her rights to bear arms?
I do want to comment, and maybe Representative Gilliard can talk about this too, about the new bill that also went into effect this year that allows early termination of probation. So, and I'd have so many clients that they just finished, so they're not eligible. But for people that have already been on probation for 3 years, even if they have a 15-year sentence, they can try to get it terminated early.
Right, and I did hear you say that, and I'm well aware of that. Also, sometimes after you complete 3 years successfully, that it just ends it. I mean, here we go again. That's kind of rare, also. But and I guess it's one of those things where you probably just have to initiate the process or whatever.
Well,
the case
actually,
may
the
be.
law requires the probation office to do that, and maybe Chief Simmons can talk about the work that his office is doing, because the law puts the onus on probation, and actually this is going to affect probably 100,000 people. But for people that have already served a 15-year sentence, it's not going to help them that much. But for people that are on paper now and that have extended sentences, the law puts the onus on the probation office to identify the people that are eligible and to petition for them for their early termination. So we're trying to address this longstanding problem that Georgia's had with having ridiculous sentences.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm on you guys' side. Just to put a word in Mr. Gilliard's ear, maybe we want to probably add that to the time served act.
I'm with you. I think you need to be on my policy committee because you're on it. And let me say this to you, too, something you just said is so powerful. You said how and why. This is why we do have the right to write the legislation, but also to repeal it. And so when we don't, when we get ready to drop this bill, it's going to have to be kind of vetted by DAs across the state, Sheriff's Association, Police Association. We're going to have all those parables. But all the things that benefit you, I'm saying the same thing you're saying. If your time is served, if you completed your probation, we should be done in reference to holding things against people. As the young people say, period. Because and we gotta be specific. When we were doing the citizen arrest repeal, they tried to chop up language and all the above, and I kept saying, no, we want to repeal it. You get what I'm saying? So the 3-year parable that you were talking about the new law, is that a waiver that we were talking about? That's just, okay. So this would be time served if you went to prison. I'll give you an example. We had some citizens coming back to Savannah. They served their time. I get a phone call when they're getting ready to leave out the gate, family waiting on them. All of a sudden, they put a hold on them.
Oh, yeah.
And they paint a picture of them also. And they paint a picture in our local media.
Oh, yeah.
And they just the worst thing, the big bad wolf and all the above. And so those persons, they serve their time. And I would tell them, just hold up a little bit because you're coming home. They can't deny you because you have served your time. You might not come right then, but you're coming home because they can't do that. So we got to go back again and hold the laws accountable. It's not right.
Oh, yeah,
It's not right.
What's your name, sir? Your last name?
Furquan.
Okay, Mr. Perquar?
Yes, ma'am.
You raised a good question and a great issue. And here's what I hope to get out of your question. Questions about how and why the law is the way it is should be answered by state lawmakers, legislators. And we have a Savannah-Chatham County delegation that represents us at the Capitol every year during regular legislative session and special session, if we actually end up having one this year. Right, coming up in November. And so one of the things that I would like to do is extend an open invitation to the rest of our Savannah-Chatham County delegation to come to a town hall event, and so that you, the citizens, can ask questions about how or why certain pieces of legislation have been passed and express how you feel about certain pieces of legislation that will be heard in Atlanta in the upcoming season. That's exactly what town hall events are for. So I appreciate it, and I hope that you come to that event.
Absolutely.
So that we can make it useful, not just for you, so you can get your questions answered, but for everybody else who has questions or demands to make of our representatives.
Absolutely. And I want to
Okay.
say I appreciate all of you guys. Mr. Gill, y'all keep up the great work. We appreciate you advocating on both sides. And
Thank
we
you.
appreciate you too, Ms. Nancy, and as well as Mr. Gill, y'all, I know well aware of we have people fighting right against people who already served their time. I've seen a couple of years ago, Miss Meg Heat,
Oh.
very advocate about fighting against some of the people that were actually coming home, and sometimes it's just not necessary. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. And I invite you, man, for real, to be a part of our policy committee, and let's write this bill. Help me write the bill. That's what I can say. Help us write it.
Invitation taken.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? I think we've had a very productive. Hello, so good to see you this evening.
Hey,
I'm glad you came out.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
In Gwinnett County, Lawrenceville, there was a judge named Weingartner, and he said he was going to pass out 1 million years, and he did it. And I think he retired like 10 years ago. So you know, judges run for office like anybody else. Is there a block in the legislative field where you're at to stop judges from doing stuff like that? Because and you can Google it. He said he'd give away 1 million years. He did it, Weingartner, in Lawrenceville, Gwinnett County. So is there any kind of block to stop an elected official, a judge, from doing something that crazy again?
You know, I love your question because the Hazard County in me is coming out right now. The best way to stop them is to register to vote. The best way to stop them is to run for office. Are you hearing me tonight? Until the citizens take claim of what is ours and use the power of the vote. We proved it in the last election. We proved it in November. We proved it in January. And guess what? I believe we can do it again. I had a friend, she was a state representative. She was from the Hispanic community, and Deborah Gonzalez. And she was an underdog. She just came in and actually served one term. And she says, I'm going to run for district attorney. I'm going to run. And they thought she was an underdog. You said Gwinnett County.
Uh-huh.
You know who's the district attorney, right? Deborah Gonzalez.
Oh, wow.
Oh, she's in Athens.
Athens. The power of the
Patsy
people.
is in, yeah.
The power of the people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
she is.
so that's how we do it. That we can't, and a lot of times we go to sleep on those positions. We just go to sleep, and John, Helter Skelter runs for judge, or Jeffrey Dahmer, or Idi Amin, everybody who's going to eat you up and all that, and we just let them go. But we got to get people who care to run for those positions, and we the people, we got the power. Trust and believe.
We
Thank
the
you.
people. We the people. Well, I think there's one more question. I know we were going to wrap up real quick. So, good evening, sir. How are you? Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks to my brother right here for the question that he asked. My question pertains mostly to that, but you answer most of it. But my situation is, I do security. I do high security for entertainers and celebrities and whatnot when they come into town. Right now, I'm having a problem with moving up in the field because of my aggravated battery charge that I have 7 years ago. So I don't have a right to bear arms right now, and is hindering me from being able to move and progress in life and take care of my kids. I need to know if there's any extra steps that I need to take in order to have that taken care of.
Before you answer that, Nancy, I'm gonna say, call Nancy. She'll be, Nancy's gonna have a line starting at the door
Nancy,
right
do you
here
have
in the
a
back of the
card?
sanctuary.
Yes, I've got
So
cards.
that,
And I was going to
she-
say, I talked to you yesterday because I talked to a client who has the exact same
Yeah.
situation where he's a security guard and he can't move up because he can't carry. And so we're talking about doing actually a multi-step process for him because we need to terminate his probation first. But then we're going to ask for a pardon with the 5-year rule waiver because we can show that he needs this in order to access his employment opportunities. Now, it is, like I said, that waiver, the 5-year rule is tougher to get. But for him, he'd have to wait another 2 years anyway, so we might go for it. Yeah,
Well-
but I do think, for all my clients, what I do is I pull their GCIC, I pull their court record, and make sure that, you shouldn't have gotten first offender for that. Make sure that a pardon is the only way to go. Make sure that there is no other faster, easier way, because the pardon process is a lengthy one.
Because my question about that is, on my case, for that instance, I was put on the first offenders, and I had another case that was open, and they were supposed to run them concurrent, but I don't think they ran them concurrent under the First Offender Act. I think they ran them as 2 separate cases. I'm not too sure.
Well,
something
it
that we
sounds
would-
like, let me say this, let me jump in here in the interest of time. I also don't want you to say anything that's gonna put your personal business out on streaming, and this is a public forum, so it's a lot more people listening than people who are here in the room, but I also don't want Nancy to give out her good trade secrets about how she helps the people in the community. And so for that reason, I'm gonna ask you to see her as soon as we convene. If you have just a few minutes, we're wrapping up right now. And that way I can let everyone else go and tell our streaming audience goodbye, and you can have
we can
Nancy's
talk.
attention, okay? She is the woman, she'll get it done. Thank you for coming tonight. Well, I think that's all the questions that we have for tonight. For those of you who are streaming, if you do have any additional questions in the chat, you can forward them to districtattorney@chathamcounty.org. And our wonderful Director of Communications, Mr. Nathaniel Wright, will make sure that your inquiry is responded to in a timely manner. I want to go ahead and close out. Thanks to our panel members. Y'all go ahead and give them a round of applause. I hope tonight was helpful to you. I learned a lot. Was it helpful? Are you glad you came out tonight? You promise that you're going to come to the next town hall event? Keep your eyes and ears open. It's going to be live, y'all. It's going to be live. Our goal is always to touch and reach the members of the Chatham County community. That's what we promise to do. We serve you. We are public servants. Every one of us in the DA's office who works there owes their pay and their job to you, the citizens of this county. We answer to you. You are our boss. And so if there's anything that you want us to cover that you think we should address or anything that should be brought to our attention, we invite you to engage our office by email and by phone call. And we devote ourselves to being responsive and to meeting your needs, to fighting for justice and improving public safety, to advocating for victims of crime, and to do so in a way that respects the constitutional rights of the accused. Thank you for joining us tonight. I am so proud to be your district attorney, and I hope that you join us again for the next Date Night Live. Thank you all for coming. Take care. Bye. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, yes. 1 second. Pastor Osborne, thank you again for opening your house to us, to our Chatham County citizens, and to the DA's office. Thank you very much for your graciousness. You've been a wonderful